We haven't done it yet, but no, I don't have to go into work.
Okay, I see. Okay. So would you say that then the fly would see not just saying no sometimes, but also even something else, like, you know, not being truthful with people?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, kind of important for us to notice, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
because
yeah.
I don't like telling lies.
Well, sure.
And yet sometimes I find myself doing it to avoid doing things.
Ah, okay. So this overly cautious and hyper-vigilant stuff is really maybe a real stuck point for you.
Yeah, I think it could be.
I mean, the thing is, again, we're trying to make sure that it's linked to things that are, you know, your valued goals, and we know that you want to get closer to your husband and your family and to other, you know, some of the, you know, people around you. I guess what you're implying is it could impact relationships some.
Yes.
And it may also, though, because I'm aware of imagining, you know, Anna, that, you know, you strike me, and I think we've even talked about this, that one of the values you have is to kind of, you know, be honest and truthful.
Yeah, I mean, I see myself as a very direct person, and I
Yeah.
think that's because it's important to tell people the truth, and yet sometimes I find myself, I do it at work too.
Okay. Now, also, did you notice how the therapist then examined the extent the problem was pervasive in multiple contexts and relationships? What's nice is the client started to actually give that information herself, but that would be the time to start to do this. And also looking at the frequency. And mainly what you're doing again there is wanting to confirm again how important the problem is. And you really, again, don't want to assume relevance without you have clear evidence. Plus, did you notice that the only behavioral descriptors not examined, remember, think of that list that we had, really pertain to intensity and duration. And why is that? Well, it turns out this happens to be the case because of this particular social signal. It turns out lying represents a verbal social signal, and those two features really don't apply to that, to lying. And that's why it wasn't assessed. So let's take a look again and see how that happened, how that he looked at pervasiveness and frequency and things of that nature.
I find myself, I do it at work too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Wow. So you lie at work too?
More to get out of the social events. You know, if it's somebody's birthday and they're all going down to the pub, then I'll say, you know, that I have a meeting or I have to go to the choir that night, when in fact that's not the case.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is important. So it's not just saying no. This fly would see you lying a lot, and what we're saying is, you know, or telling fibs or something of that nature, right? And, you know, as you and I have worked on other things before, one of the things we want to do is make sure that it really is something that could be a problem. This kind of sounds it. So it kind of happens a bit at work, you know, if there's activities there. You might make up some stuff to avoid things or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're doing it with your husband, we know for sure. And have you done it more than once with your husband?
Yes. You know, like, he takes the kids away for weekends. You know, sometimes they'll go camping. And I always find a reason not to go with them. And I feel bad that I'm left out. And I think that they think that I'm not wanting to be with them. So.
Right. Okay, makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. And lastly, did you notice that the therapist then assessed the social consequences of the maladaptive behavior? And this was asking the client, you know, in this case, whether they'd ever been caught lying to others. Not a bad thing to look at as well, to look at the relevance of it. And so this essentially provides additional support for target relevancy. Let's take a look at how that was done.
And does he ever catch you in one of these, like, fibs or whatever? Have you ever been, like, found out by anybody, I guess? That's a good question, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I feel really bad.
Oh, you have? Okay. Okay. So, yeah, wow. So, okay, so has your husband caught you or someone else, or what's happened with that?
Well, just last week, the neighbours invited me around for a coffee morning one Sunday. And I knew there was going to be a house full. And as we've discussed, you know, I'm not very good at big social gatherings, and so I told them that I was gonna that I was having some lavender delivered, and that I had to get the lavender in the garden.
So, we saw that. Now we've done step 3. Now let's go to the next step, shall we? So you've now assessed what the problem is when it comes to the theme, what the social signaling problem is, and you've had the client kind of behavioral, describe it in a behavioral way that you can really get a sense of how maladaptive it is. And so step 4 is this. You want to demonstrate the maladaptive social signal. And here's the key thing. You don't want to just talk about a signal. That's the whole point. Now, most of the time you can do this. There are times that you can't. So here's the thing. Whenever feasible, ask the client to show you what the maladaptive signal looks or sounds like, rather than just imagining it. That's the key thing here. You don't want to rely solely on the client's verbal reports of a social signal. And really, this is, again, the essential part of identifying the extent it's actually experienced as off-putting or maladaptive, because you can use yourself as kind of the target for that. So when we're thinking about step 4, you want to ask the client again to demonstrate it, and you're trying to figure out whether it's actually off-putting. So remember, with the example that we've been working on so far, which had to do with the social signal of lying, it's just kind of difficult to have that be demonstrated, and that's an example of one that you wouldn't have demonstrated. But let's take a look at a different session with the same client. And in this session, they're doing some targeting again around a theme. And in this, the therapist is working to identify social signaling targets linked to the OC theme, high social comparisons, and envy and bitterness. And let's see how they have the client demonstrate the maladaptive social signal.
Yeah,
So how did it look like when you did that? Show me.
I'll try. Something like, okay, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
It's your client.
Okay.
We'll do it. We'll do it whatever way you want.
Yeah. Okay, so you told her that, and you think that she read it as kind of sarcastic or anything, or what? Or was it sarcastic?
There was some sarcasm.
Kind of looked at it, yeah. Okay.
And I think, with hindsight, I think that I was moving to fatalistic like that. Kind of like, okay.
Yeah, it's like,
okay.
So here you are.
Okay, so that's an example of how it might look. And recall, there are 3 factors we use to evaluate the social signaling behavior of others during interaction. So you're going to be thinking that yourself when you're looking at the demonstration. The ambiguity is one. So the extent the sender's intentions are actually overtly, directly expressed versus kind of masked or inhibited. And remember, we tend to evaluate indirect, ambiguous social signals as potential threats, as off-putting. So that's one thing you're taking into account. The second thing you're looking at is contextual fit. What this means is the extent the social signal is situationally or culturally appropriate in the given context. So flat facial expressions are the norm during a poker game, but not during a first date. At least you can hope so, right? If you're going to have a second one. And then the third thing we take into account is responsivity. We're watching how the other person responds to our signals. So the extent of reciprocal responding and matching of emotional expression during interaction. So does the person laugh when the other person laughs? Is there mutual laughter? That kind of thing. Make sense? So those are the things you're looking when you're having your client demonstrate the signal to actually decide for yourself whether you think it's a relevant and maladaptive to target. Now, here's the thing. During client demonstrations, be alert for opportunities to label and clarify the specific features of the social signal that are actually maladaptive. Because there could be a number of things that are blends of signals that are coming together. And they might involve monotonic voice, and combined with a furrowed brow or a burglar smile, all kinds of things, but you want to identify the specific features. So let's watch an example of how this is done. And in this case, with the OC theme, high social comparisons and envy, bitterness.
Well, she's not clever enough to do it.
I see. And you did. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a little smile that you had when you said that it's too complicated. Did you? I don't know if you noticed it.
No, I didn't notice that.
It's one of the things you and I are working on is social signaling, because it's called a burglar smile, actually.
Yeah, you mentioned them before.
Yeah. So you kind of did, it's a little bit of pleasure about something. So
Yeah,
what's the
yeah.
secret? It's like, remember we talked about secret pride?
Yeah, I'm the only one that can look after this stuff. That's
Yeah,
what it
something
was.
like
Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So now step 5 now is you want to demonstrate back the maladaptive social signals. So you're not done. You get the client to demonstrate it, and then you want to demonstrate it back to the client. And so whenever possible, you want to demonstrate the client the social signaling target and then assess their experience to it. The idea is to let them have the opportunity to viscerally experience what it's like to have that same social signal directed toward them. So, for example, by asking them, after you demonstrate it back, so what did it feel like when I behaved like that? Did you feel closer or further away from me? That's a good thing to ask. What this does, again, is to allow the client to viscerally experience what it feels to be on the receiving end. And, it's really an essential part of gaining commitment for change. So let's take a look at step 5 of how a therapist would then demonstrate back the maladaptive social signal and then assess the social consequences. Here's an example.
I was thinking, wonder what the impact is on other people. If someone, say, you gave me a compliment, say you said something, give me a compliment, best you can.
I like your glasses.
And if say if you say that to me, and I go, and I kind of it's nice weather we're having today. In other words, I don't really acknowledge it, or I don't feel it as genuine or something. Or if I start thinking that you're manipulating me. I don't know, I guess my question is for you, and that's, do you think it might impact the relationship in some way if I did that?
Yeah.
How do you think it might?
Well, I guess you just kind of rolled your eyes, kind of made me feel you weren't really bothered, you weren't really listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that, isn't it?
Okay, you can see how that plays out and how important it is. Here's the main point. Rather than telling OC clients what is wrong with their social signaling, you want to collaboratively evaluate the social signaling impact on social connectedness. Again, using the 3 factors that all humans use to evaluate social signals by examining together the extent it was communicated intentions directly, the extent the social signal was appropriate in the given context, and the extent the social signal was responsive to the signals of others. And this is how you make your targeting signaling so much more powerful. And then essentially what you're doing is encouraging the clients to examine the utility of social signals for themselves. And here's some examples of things that you might want to ask. So things like, to what extent did my social signaling reflect my core values? To what extent did the consequences of my social signaling achieve my original intentions? To what extent am I proud of how I socially signaled? And the answers that emerge from these, they can be used as self-inquiry questions or all part of the process of the discussions that you have about a target. Again, you don't want to consider them definitive or absolute truth. Instead, you want to use them as working hypotheses that will then be, over time, re-examined or together with your client. And of course refined. And that's the same case with all your targets. They're going to be constantly updated and refined over time as you get to know your client better. So let's watch another example of a therapist demonstrating back a maladaptive social signal and assessing, in this case, the social consequences. Shall we?
But in the same way, so ask me about how my day was. Just ask me.
How was your day?
Fine. Keep asking me some questions, like we're having a conversation.
Have you been working all day?
Yes. Can you tell a difference in my expression just right there?
Yes.
What's the difference? What am I? Because you know me enough, right?
Yeah.
So what? Did you notice a change in how I was social
Yes,
signaling?
I did.
Yeah. And what was the difference?
You lost your animation. You looked bored. You looked depressed, I suppose.
Yes, I know. And it's the same kind of thing. The question would be, if you were hanging out with someone like that a lot, would you want to hang out with them a lot more?
No.
Okay, so you can see how this works, how it plays out. And by the way, And what's important to notice, if you looked at all these ways the therapist was demonstrating back, did you notice actually the short duration of the demonstration in each of the above examples? That's important to recognize. You don't need prolonged displays, at least always, to get your point across. That's the whole point, is you want to help them experience what it's like to be on the receiving end. Remember, why is that? Because our brains are hardwired to respond to social signals from others in milliseconds. So it doesn't take a lot. What's most important is that your demonstration actually transmits the essence of the social signaling problem to the client. What this does, again, is allow them to viscerally experience what it's like to be on the receiving end. Meaning, essentially, that the client is able to then experience it and recognize clearly that it's maladaptive, doesn't work. And so that means that they'll report back things like that they found it off-putting or uncomfortable, or that it just didn't work, it's maladaptive in some way. And here's the thing. If you ask a client about what their experience of your demonstration to them, and they don't report your demonstration as off-putting, then redo your demonstration. And all you have to do there is increase the intensity or duration of the display. So you make sure, again, you're trying to get your point across here in this case. And then check in again about the client's visceral experience. Hope this makes sense. Okay. So we're ready now for step 6. And what do you do next? Now you want to label the maladaptive social signal and then agree to start tracking it on the RODBT diary card. Now recall, there's 2 common indirect social signaling styles in OC. You've got excessive pro-social signaling, characterized by phony smiles, excessive head nodding, over-apologizing, don't hurt me responses, things like this. And then you have a conspicuous lack of pro-social signaling, flat, deadpan facial expressions, a monotonic voice tone, rarely admitting when they're wrong, or a silent treatment, things like this. So what's important here is that the social signal you target, again, is relevant. We keep hearing that word, don't we? Is it keeping them out of the tribe? Remember, it's not what is said, it's how it's signaled that matters most when it comes to social connectedness. So, for example, you can tell someone to shut up in a way that makes them laugh and love you even more, rather than despise you. You ever notice that? So make sure you label accurately, that the label you give is accurate, and that it accurately describes the maladaptive features of the social signaling problem. And why is that? Well, here's the thing. Here's an example. Labeling a social signal that's signal lying rather than evading, when the client's behavior actually involves intentionally telling untruths, what it does is help the client, remember that the behavior goes against their core valued goals for honesty and truthfulness by not downplaying its negative consequences. And the point is, you don't have to get all serious about using the word lying. It's just something people happen to lie. And if you read the skills manual, you'll see there's a whole lesson that talks about how often it happens among humans and that type of thing. So it's a behavior we engage in. We don't have to get worked up about it, but we can still target it in treatment and help the client learn how to change it. Now, accurate labeling of maladaptive social signaling target blocks, again, automatic tendencies to avoid responsibility or admit to wrongdoing, which, by the way, is something we probably all would like to do sometimes, right? So that's one of the big things about making sure when you're labeling a target to put it on a diary card, you don't, talk about it in a way that kind of removes the reminder of it as a problem. Nothing going on here. So essentially it reminds clients of their valued goals and practice living accordingly. So again, labeling it, putting it on the diary card. Let's watch an example of this. Now recall our earlier scenario where the maladaptive social signal identified was linked to the OC theme, hypervigilant, detailed focus, and overly cautious behavior, and the problem that had been identified was called lying. Let's just take a look at how that's done.
All right, so I guess this, this sounds to me like we might have a good overt behavior, something that we could actually kind of monitor over time on the diary card.
Telling lies.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a good one to me. What do you think?
It's probably a very good one because I don't like it.
Yeah, well, that's true. And it might mean, and also what we've noticed, Anna, is that it goes against your values. Remember, one of the reasons we're here is to work on your depression as well. So it seems to me that if you, there's a good way to make yourself depressed is don't live by your values.
Yeah, no, I feel very bad about it
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah, but right now I want to say you're doing a really good job telling me about it, because one of the things we're working on, you and I, is having you not kind of mask your inner feelings. So the very fact that you're talking about the lie, it will make it not only harder to do it in the future because you're revealing that, but also you're kind of doing what we want to have happen in therapy right now.
It's hard, isn't it?
It is hard. But how does that feel when I say that to you right now?
I've never talked to anybody about this before, so
Okay.
I suppose I'm embarrassed, but I also feel like this is going to help.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having the willingness to reveal this, because as you and I have said, it kind of, I don't know, it just seems like we're not going to be able to clean the house right, if you think about getting your life in order again,
Yeah.
unless we look at all the things that might be keeping you stuck.
Yeah.
And
I think this is a big one.
I think it might be. It seems it's really linked to some core issues for you. But first of all, let's not rush into it again. We want to not assume that that's the entire answer. What we want to do is then monitor this for the week and just see how frequently it occurs. Because it'd be very interesting to see, how much you kind of fibbing and lying and doing all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, so don't necessarily try to change it in the next week. For the first week that let's just monitor it and see what happens, okay?
Okay.
Although I'm aware of imagining it might be a little difficult to not want to change, but so I guess what we'll do is on the card, let's monitor it. Shall we do it 0 to 5?
So is that how many times?
Well, we could do it either that way. You could record a frequency count, or you could kind of 0 be meaning like you didn't do it at all.
Okay.
Like a 1, a little bit, a 2, but it's there for that day. Remember, this is for each day.
Right.
A 3 would be you definitely did it a lot. A 4 would be, that's a lot, and a 5 would be more than ever.
Okay.
But
yeah, let's do it that way.
no, we could. But here's a thought, though, too. I mean, I'm aware of imagining it doesn't happen like. How many times a day would you say you end up lying or fibbing or whatever?
Well, there are some days where I don't do it because there isn't
No
the
reason to.
opportunity to do it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So it's not like you're
It
doing
doesn't happen
So you're
every-
not lying all the time.
No.
Yeah. Are you lying ever to me in here?
Well, I might sometimes not tell you the whole truth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that kind of makes sense on some level, right? Because you and I are still getting to know each other, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is in life, it's important. It's okay to edit. To actually not feel the need to have to always reveal everything to another person. And at the same time, both of us have kind of recognized that one of the things that seems to be keeping you stuck from getting closer to people is having the capacity to kind of reveal vulnerability or let people, know when you're kind of scared of stuff, things like this. Yeah. And maybe that's why, we could, you and I'll figure out together, but it could be that this is one of the reasons why you tell these fibs, that you kind of make up stuff because you actually don't want to let people know that, deep down you might be feeling a little vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I say that to you, how does that, what happens for you right now? Does that fit for what we were talking about this, or am I missed something?
No, I think that it seems it's very hard for me to say to people. It's very hard for me to say to myself that
Mm-hmm.
I find it difficult to mix with people or that I don't want to go to a party. It's very hard.
Yeah, so that revealing vulnerability again. And so again, I want to point out that you're kind of practicing it now, but one step at a time, right? So let's do that. Now, just before we, so we've got that for the card, and then, so the other thing we want to look at is, when you think about this behavior, this lying or fibbing, do you prefer fibbing or lying on the card? Which would you prefer?
Well, fibbing doesn't sound quite so bad.
So it's up to you. Which one do you think describes it well? Which do you think will help you with this and understand it and recognize
Well,
it?
I think that if we, I like to call a spade a spade.
Okay.
So I think that we should go for,
You want to call it a lie?
yeah.
Okay. All right. And you're sure you're not being too tough on yourself with this, huh?
So one of the things we're working on as well, isn't it?
I don't know. But fine. Let's call it a lie and then see what happens.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things that you might have noticed there, just like RO Detective B.B. Baker. So, first of all, did you notice that the therapist used ask, don't tell techniques to confirm the client agreed with the target, in this case lying, and that it was relevant by linking it to core value goals before moving on? Plus, did you notice the therapist did not overtly soothe the client after they reported that they felt very bad about it afterwards, or after they said, it's hard, isn't it? And that's kind of classic RODBT in some ways. Instead, what the therapist did is reminded the client how candid self-disclosure represented therapeutic progress, since it went opposite to natural tendencies to mask inner feelings or hide intentions from others, which is the whole point of what she's working on. And so, the point here is overt soothing or attempts to regulate the client when they say things like that, at least from an RODBT point of view, may make it actually harder for the client to come face to face with how they've contributed to the problem, or may reinforce disguised demands. Remember, part of RODBT work is helping a client, and ourselves, of course, move to places that are our personal unknowns, our personal edge, to actually do self-inquiry work. So, regulation or feeling good is not necessarily valued all the time in RODBT because it may prevent us from learning. Now, did you also notice that the therapist then checked in with the client immediately afterwards, saying, but how does that feel when I say that to you right now? So that was, immediately after they'd, talked about it being hard and that type of thing. And what the client did was then say, well, they felt embarrassed about their lying. Yet again, rather than soothing, since feeling guilty, shame, or embarrassed about lying is actually a warranted behavior if you value honesty, of course. The therapist instead focused on reinforcing the candid self-disclosure the client was engaging in by saying, but thanks for having the willingness to reveal this, and then use metaphor to highlight the importance of the target. Whereupon, essentially the client agreed, saying, I guess this is a big one for me. So let's watch this bits and to just solidify our learning.
All right. So I guess this, this sounds to me like we might have a good overt behavior, something that we could actually kind of monitor over time on the diary card.
Telling lies.
Well, yeah. It sounds like a good one to me. What do you think?
It's probably a very good one because I don't like it.
Yeah, well, that's true. And it might mean, and also what we've noticed, Anna, is that it goes against your values. Remember, one of the reasons we're here is to work on your depression as well. So it seems to me that if you, there's a good way to make yourself depressed is don't live by your values.
Yeah, no, I feel very bad about it afterwards.
Yeah, but right now I want to say you're doing a really good job telling me about it, because one of the things we're working on, you and I, is having you not kind of mask your inner feelings. So the very fact that you're talking about the lie, it will make it not only harder to do it in the future because you're revealing that, but also you're kind of doing what we want to have happen in therapy right now.
It's hard, isn't it?
It is hard. But how does that feel when I say that to you right now?
I've never talked to anybody about this before, so I suppose I'm embarrassed, but I also feel like this is going to help.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having the willingness to reveal this, because as you and I have said, it kind of, I don't know, it just seems like we're not going to be able to clean the house right, if you think about getting your life in order again, unless we look at all the things that might be keeping you stuck. Yeah. And
I think this is a big one.
It might be. It seems.
Okay. Now let's continue with our analysis with RO Detective B.B. Baker. So, now, did you notice that after the therapist gained commitment from the client to target the problem behavior, they then encourage the client to not rush in and fix it prematurely, and instead actually to monitor it or watch it the first week in order to ensure it was actually a problem without necessarily changing it. And what this does is, by the way, another thing, it functions to block automatic OC tendencies for compulsive fixing, TE. So let's watch again how that happened.
It's really linked to some core issues for you. But first of all, like, let's not rush into it again. We want to not assume that that's the entire answer. What we want to do is then monitor this for the week and just see how frequently it occurs. Because it'd be very interesting to see, how much you kind of fibbing and lying and doing all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, so don't necessarily try to change it in the next week. For the first week that we let's just monitor it and see what happens, okay? Although we're imagining it might be a little difficult to not want to change, but...
Okay, so we saw that. Now, also, did you notice that the therapist then collaboratively work with the client on how the type of scale that they would use or means of recording the presence of the actual social signal, in this case lying, on the diary card? In this case, for example, whether it would be more effective to rate the behavior in its intensity on a 0 to 5 scale, with 5 representing the highest intensity, or simply the presence, yes or no, things like that. Let's watch again to solidify our learning.
So I guess what we'll do is on the card, let's monitor, shall we do it 0 to 5?
So is that how many times?
Well, we could do it either that way. You could record a frequency count, or you could kind of 0 be, meaning like you didn't do it at all.
Okay.
Like a 1, a little bit, a 2, but yeah, it's there for that day. Remember, this is for each day.
Right.
A 3 would be, you definitely did it a lot. A 4 would be, whew, that's a lot. And a 5 would be more than ever.
Okay.
But
yeah, let's do it that way.
Okay. And then, did you also notice that the therapist incorporated a therapeutic tease into the rating discussion? Essentially after downplaying the severity of the problem. So you're not lying all the time, he says. And then the therapeutic tease occurred. Remember, therapeutic teases are friendly challenges. By asking the client with a slight smile and a friendly tone of voice, "Are you ever lying to me here?" Whereupon the therapist uses the tease as an opportunity to teach the client about the importance of editing what one reveals to another person. In this case, explains that it depends on the nature of the relationship and reminded the client that they're still getting to know each other. And so that was the whole point of that. But it also kind of smuggles to the client the tease that it's kind of useful for the client to practice being honest with the therapist, and they're not going to get upset about what they hear, which is kind of important to say to our OC clients. So, and then again, this was followed by a check-in to reconfirm the client was engaged. Let's watch again just to solidify our learning.
Okay.
But,
yeah, let's do it that way.
No, we could, but here's a thought, though, too. I mean, I'm aware of imagining it doesn't happen like, how many times a day would you say you end up lying or fibbing or whatever?
Well, there are some days where I don't do it because there isn't the opportunity to do it.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not like you're doing
It doesn't happen
so you're not lying all the time.
No.
Yeah. Are you lying ever to me in here?
Well, I might sometimes not tell you the whole truth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that kind of makes sense on some level, right? Because you and I are still getting to know each other, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is in life, it's important, it's okay to edit, to actually not feel the need to have to always reveal everything to another person. And at the same time, both of us have kind of recognized that one of the things that seems to be keeping you stuck from getting closer to people is having the capacity to kind of reveal vulnerability or let people, know when you're kind of scared of stuff, things like this. Yeah. And maybe that's why, we could, you and I'll figure out together, but it could be that this is one of the reasons why you tell these fibs. That you kind of make up stuff because you actually don't want to let people know that, deep down you might be feeling a little vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I say that to you, how does that, what happens for you right now? Does that fit for what we were talking about this, or am I missed something?
No, I think that it seems it's very hard for me to say to people, it's very hard for me to say to myself that I find it difficult to mix with people or that I don't want to go to a party. It's very hard.
Yeah, so that revealing vulnerability again. And so again, I want to point out that you're kind of practicing it now, but one step at a time, right? So let's do that. Now, just before we, so we've got that for the card, and then, so the other thing we want to look at is...
Now, notice that they ended up deciding to actually call it lying in that step as opposed to fibbing, but they gave the client the choice, and she decided that that would be a more accurate label. Now, let's go to step 7. Step 7 involves, of this protocol, remember, of using OC themes is to identify the private behaviors. In this case, when we talk about private behaviors in RLDBT, we're thinking about thoughts, emotions, and sensations, things that other people can't see, whereas social signaling behaviors they can, which are linked to the maladaptive social signal, and then tracking those on the diary card. So let's watch an example of this using, again, the lying example when it's agreed as the maladaptive social signaling target. And again, this is from the theme, hypervigilant, detailed focus, and overly cautious behavior. Shall we?
Now, the other thing we want to think about is when you do this behavior, so remember we're talking about hypervigilance and kind of overly cautious, and we're talking about kind of lying or saying no, all this kind of stuff that's happening. You know, is there a thought that comes to mind, you know, or when you're doing this stuff, what are you thinking just before you lie, say?
Yeah, there's a kind of there's almost like a freeze reaction first, and then there's kind of like oh God, I can't do this.
Okay, so it's something like, oh God, I can't do this. Okay, so why don't we could monitor that. Let's see how often you say to yourself, oh God, I can't do this in the next week. How's that? Just, you know, again, we're exploring together, trying to figure out how it is that you kind of get into some issues that, you know, we know, related to this cautious stuff. Let's just, you know, we can change it if we need to. Okay. And then, you know, if you had to call an emotion around this, what kind of emotion do you think you're having?
Oh, it's that numbness. There's a numbness.
Okay.
Okay. Would that be fear, do you think?
I don't know. It could be. Yeah. It could, I mean, if you think about it, you're wanting to avoid something, right?
Right.
So it could be fear.
Yeah.
So it could be anxiety, fear, numb. Which do you want to, you know, for this next week, which do you think is most associated with it?
Can we go with the numbness?
Yeah, let's just do that. So we're going to track numbness, and we're going to also track this this thought, you know, oh God, I can't do this.
Okay. Now, if you notice with that last step, the therapist allowed the client to have a bit more control with that. I think, you know, one way to think about that is the client had already done a good job really working hard to identify a relevant target, had already identified a relevant thought. And when it came to the emotion, there's, you know, I mean, again, early days you were trying to help the client get into the practice of actually enjoying self-discovery. So, you know, in this case, they went with numbness as the thing to track because the client kind of, you know, experienced that as most relevant, at least at the time. Now, and again, though, it could change. So, and expect those kinds of things to change over time as you get to know the client better or do chain analyses on things. Now, the thing about newly identified targets, though, is they should be simply monitored, as I mentioned the first week, before you target them as a general principle. That's what you want to think about it. So, you know, before you do anything about them, and you just don't want to move into quickly changing them too fast. And what, again, this does smuggle is the idea to compulsive OC fixers is, you know, that not every problem in life needs to be solved immediately. And that's an important lesson for them. And plus, again, it allows you to then just monitor the frequency of the problem without doing anything to change to see how, you know, how relevant it is again. Now, plus, you know, want to remember targets should be modified and refined over the course of treatment. You know, partly as a function of new ones emerging, so some will disappear as they begin to change their social signaling habits. And, you know, partly as a function of getting to know them, you'll refine them and make them more precise or more relevant. Sometimes, so you'll have older ones improving, new ones emerging. And oftentimes new targets appear simply as a function of getting to know the client better, actually. So here's the thing. Treatment targeting in RODBT is a continual process that ideally gets increasingly detailed over time and relevant to the specific problems that the client is bringing and struggling with. That's the point. Okay, so let's summarize the steps for this protocol on using OC themes to individualize treatment targeting. Number one, remember, the first step is to introduce the name of the theme and ask the client what words come to mind when you think about, and then just give the name of the theme. Next thing you want to do, second step, is ask then, how does, say, aloof or distant relationships or something, whatever you're targeting, apply to your life and with whom? So how does the theme apply to your life and with whom is critical? And, essentially, what valued goals does it prevent you achieving or living by? Remember, and it doesn't have to be long. None of these steps, if you go back and look at the tapes that you're seeing here, it's not that you spend a long time drilling down. You're basically getting a little bit of information and then moving on with the protocol. Because the idea is to get this completed in about 15 or minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes or less, something like that. Now, the third step is to ask if I were a fly on the wall, what would I see or hear when you're behaving, and then give the name of the theme again. Essentially, again, in other words, how would an objective observer know you were actually engaging in the problem behavior? What would they see or hear again? That's the third step. Then what you want to do is the fourth step is ask the client to demonstrate the maladaptive social signal to ensure it actually is off-putting. That way you can assess it using those three criteria. And then you want to demonstrate it back to the client, and that way they get the experience of viscerally being on the receiving end, right? And that's step 5. Then step 6 is agree on a label that actually accurately describes the maladaptive nature of the social signal or the overt behavior. And then you want to, at the last step, is identify private, meaning internal behaviors, thoughts, emotions that are linked or could be linked to the maladaptive social signal. So that's the protocol. You successfully made through it. Well done. And so now let's take a look at the entire lesson briefly, as we always do, and then we're going to be done with this lesson. So now remember, the key to effective treatment targeting with our OC clients is to ask how my client's social signaling may impact their social connectedness. And in RODBT, again, ideally, the vast majority of therapeutic time is spent on social signaling deficits, which are linked to the OC coping, the maladaptive coping that we talked about. Now, again, targets should be modified and refined over the course of treatment and as a function of new ones emerging and older ones improving. We also learned that there are 3 strategies for targeting maladaptive social signaling. And this is a reminder, there's OC subtypes, there's OC themes, and in-session behaviors. And today's lessons focused on how to use OC themes. Now, we also talked about the 5 OC social signaling themes and how they are posited to uniquely influence this problem of emotional loneliness that OC clients exhibit. We also started to talk, as you recall, about cultural norms and how they matter, and how when it comes to these, what's the cultural differences emerge in what's considered maladaptive behavior. Essentially, we're saying the client has the final say. And then we talked a little bit about how to work with that. And we also learned that OC themes are not targets. They're too broad. They're not specific enough to function as targets. You got to remember that. And then, again, really important, only introduce 1 theme per session. What else did we learn? Well, ideally, all targets are mutually agreed as relevant by both the therapist and client, but don't let the client be the one that decides everything. We've talked before about that. And you want to link social signaling targets with valued goals. And remember, these start to be obtained early during the orientation phase. And by the way, it really helps to just follow the step-by-step protocol for how to, this formal treatment targeting with OC social signaling themes, and the page numbers are in the textbook there for you. And that is the whole step process that we just went through. And remember now, during demonstrations, you want to label and clarify the maladaptive nature or components of the social signal. And importantly, you want to demonstrate the signal back. You don't just want to talk about it. And this allows the client to be on the receiving end, to viscerally experience what it's like. And you also want to look at collaboratively how it impacts social connectedness. And that came from those 3 factors we use as humans to evaluate social signal: ambiguity, contextual fit, and responsivity. Remember? Now, newly identified targets should be simply monitored the first week they're being targeted for change. And that's a general principle. So Let's put it in practice, a couple homework assignments, shall we? So download and read an example of valued goals and themes and targets. That's available. Then you want to read step 8 of the formal targeting protocol, which is on page 253 of your textbook. And, reflect on the themes and targets you have agreed if you've already been working with a client and that you've done. And one of the things you might ask yourself, because one of the things that we talk about in the textbook is rank ordering the themes and the targets that you have or the themes you're working on. And, see which one do you think that now that you're learning more that is most important to change first, because you want to go with the things that are keeping them out of the tribe. That's the most important. And so, again, if you think you're doing well with this, you might take a look at whether the order or the relevancy that you've decided, the priorities you've worked on, whether they need to be updated. And partly it might be a function of what the person or persons that the social signal happens around and the degree it's associated with close social bonds. And if it's not seeming to be as relevant in some ways based on your reevaluation of how you've been using themes to date, this is when you might begin to actually redo some of your targeting or bring it up with your client in a way that you can be more precise about what you think you're missing. That's the whole idea. Now, recommended reading, Chapter 9, using OC social signaling themes to enhance targeting, basic principles. The page numbers are there. And also valued goals, themes, and targets in the textbook as well, in Chapter 9. Okay, so thanks very much. I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson. It's been a lot of information this time.